Hi everyone, and welcome to Dodo Bird Drawing. In today's Drawing an Extinct Animal video, I'm going to be drawing the Pinta Island Tortoise. However, I'm specifically drawing Lonesome George here. Like, he was the last one, and he was named and well known, so I'm drawing him specifically here. Anyways, with that all out of the way, let's roll the intro and let's get started. Okay, so with the ability to scroll through various reference images all ready to go, I am beginning with the basic sketch, starting with the head and neck, chest area, and then the leg and part of the shell. Though I will mention that most of this, quite frankly put, isn't going to be kept for the long time because I changed quite a bit of the drawing throughout the process just due to various changes in how I want to do it. For example, the head gets smaller here, though I don't end up keeping it at all because I just decide to redraw it later on. So I begin a redraw, but then I decide to do the shell, I believe, first, like get the shell and stuff all in. So I do the shell and a bit of a tail before moving on to do the shell, and there's like a bit of a divot, so I try to get that in like so before finishing up the shell, like so. I then move on to doing a bit more on the divot just to make it look good, before moving on to doing the head and neck area again. This time attempt 2 or 3, depending on if you want to count the just shrinking as an attempt. But then I also decide to redraw the leg, like so. I then go on to continuing the attempt for the head and neck, which takes a while to do because it just takes me a bit to get something that I'm happy with here. That position is fine, but potentially, but the size was wrong, and then the neck looks very wrong there. And so I then make it a bit further up to make the neck a bit longer, potentially more accurate like that. And it still doesn't look right to me, so I change the neck a bit more. That doesn't look good, so I change it even more. I still don't like how it looks. I then add a bit of knees to the legs just to kind of show that's where the bending would be, just for depth reasons. It doesn't end up mattering. So then I completely scrap the head and neck like that and redraw it. Head is way too big. I attempt to shrink it. Still doesn't look great. I think at this point, the logic is he can pull in his head a bit more so I can make it a bit shorter, but it just does not look right. So then at this point, I just completely scrap both legs. No, I make them shorter to see if that helps. It really doesn't that much, if at all, frankly. So I have that. Still doesn't look good, so I decide to go make them a bit thinner, at least the front one, and maybe bend it a bit more. It still doesn't look great, so I completely scrap both of them, and then at this point I decide to use the depiction I've seen in one image of Lonesome George of him lying down, so that is the leg position I decide to go with here. Then I continue on to do a bit more tweaks to the head and neck just to make it look ever so more accurate, and it takes me a while to get it to something I am happy with. Just for various reasons, so this is just a process of just completely restarting the drawing of the head and neck on several occasions, and I think that is what I end up keeping. I do a bit more tweaks to it, but I think I decide at this point I just need to have something. So then I begin coloring it in, beginning with the shell, like so, going with a grayish color for the shell here, because that seemed to be pretty accurate to what the image is shown. Then I go with a kind of brown-gray color for his skin, because that seemed to be generally what it was, at least something along that line. So at least it's close. So I fill in his front legs, well, the legs in the foreground, as well as his head and neck, before doing a bit more filling in work for the shell. Because there was quite a bit of area left open because I was using a bigger tool, so I fill that in like so, and then I move on to doing the same thing with the legs, maybe? No, I begin to add in the shell, plate pattern, if that makes sense. It's generally at least a similar shtick to Lonesome George's actual shell, but creative liberties were taken, and so it's not exactly accurate, but it gets the general idea across of his shell, so that's what I guess matters here. I then add a bit more detail work to this one part that's kind of like coming over the back leg, just to make it look a bit more distinct. I then move on to doing some of these like orangish color patches that he seemed to have on his head and neck. So I added a few of those in like so before adding in the normal electric blue eye and smile, which makes him look kind of derpy here, and the light glint before adding in wrinkles because he was old, like really, really old. He also just had them, so it made sense to put them in here. I then do a bit more filling in work finally on the legs, like so. Just filling them in just to make it look a bit more smoothed up before doing a bit more work on the shell. And then I believe I add in the dividing line for the front leg before adding in a toe, like so, in both legs, before moving on to doing the back legs, like so, and like so, and then adding in the tail, like so. Well, it was already there, just coloring in the tail, and then doing a bit more work on the shell, removing the outline sketch, and then doing a bit more work on the shell top to make it look a bit more like consistent. It also ends up adding a bit of like shading, so that's nice. And I do the same thing on the bottom, even though it's not as immediately needed for that reason. And then I noticed that you can kind of see like his belly in the image I was referencing mainly at this point. So I add in a belly like so for like accuracy purposes. I then move on to smoothing out the drawing, beginning with the head and neck area, like so, going through there and through there, and then going all the way down through there, smoothing that up like so, and then doing a bit more on this lower shell area before moving on to that leg like so, and then looping around like that. I then do a bit more on the shell like so, into the divot of the shell, and then on the top part of it like so, and then I move on to doing the like background stuff. It's like the under the shell like belly part and the background legs like so, and yeah. I then do a bit more there, and then I do the tail smoothing out like so, and then at this point I believe I add in the dividing line, beginning with the shell and the leg in the foreground, and then the shell and like the bottom area before moving on briefly to the front legs, then continuing the shell and the bottom part of like the belly area like so, and then continuing on doing the same basically shading lines in through there, making them look a bit more smooth. And then I do the same thing with the shell and the back leg like so, and then I do the tail as well, and then I do a bit more tweaks there to smooth it out a little bit more, do a bit more filling in work with the shell as well as the leg like so, and then I just do a bit more smoothing out work there. I then do some filling in work for the back leg like so, continuing the shading line down at this point for accuracy reasons, and then filling in the front background leg like so, and then as well as the front leg as well. I then do a bit more smoothing out work on the belly area like so, before I do a bit more on the tip of the tail, not tail, shell, and continue the dividing line there, continuing the dividing line there as well, and doing a bit more smoothing out work on the dividing line between the shell and the main body. And then at this point I consider adding in some of the same spots on his legs, but they just don't look right to me. So that concludes my drawing of Lonesome George, the Pinta Island Tortoise. What do you think of my drawing? Let me know in the comments down below. And as always, if you enjoyed the video, please leave a like and subscribe, and I will see you all next time. Bye!